Hello, my name is Bethany, and today I am doing my presentation on the year without a summer, and that year was 1816. What caused the erratic weather that hit New England was a volcano that erupted in Indonesia. And because of that, over a year later, the weather in New England had changed completely. In June, July, and August, they suffered hard frost, killing a lot of the crops. They had erratic winter storms that would come through, dropping 6 inches of snow in June or in July. They had a massive frostbite come through. One Vermont farmer lost his toes to frostbite. They were having one day of 7 degrees, and within 30 hours it dropped down to 30 degrees. It was just, like they mentioned, a year without a summer. It was also dubbed 1800 and nearly frozen to death, which some men actually did freeze to death, unfortunately. And what I think is really cool about this specific year is that nobody knew the cause until a historian was able to piece together the information from sailors' and travelers' journals about a volcanic eruption that happened during a certain time, and then piecing it together with the erratic weather that was hitting New England. And it was the historians that kind of pulled it all together to realize that this volcanic eruption that happened halfway around the world caused people in New England to freeze and have their crops destroyed and everything like that, just because of a volcano. I found a few newspaper articles that talked about this. Most of them were written, one was written 100 years later in 1919, and it was a comparison to how people are whining about how humid it was at the time in 1919. And the newspaper article was basically saying, hey, listen, we shouldn't be complaining about the weather because just 100 years ago there was a summer without a summer. I mean, a year without a summer. I mean, they didn't have any warm temperatures. They, froze to death. Another newspaper article mentioned how well the crops were doing. Now, this article was written in 1907, and it mentioned how they were having a bumper crop season. I mean, the wheat was coming in. It was almost overflowing, and they compared that to in the year 1816, when the bushels of wheat were going from $5 to $8 for just one bushel. I mean, that seems like an astronomical price to me, because I couldn't imagine how much $8 would be from then to now, how much that would, change. So it was really interesting. I also found actually one Washington Post article and one New York Times article that were both written in 2016, so it's 200 years after the event. And it's not until really, I want to say the article, there was an article written in 1947, and that one finally brought in the reason why New England had such a hard summer. And that was the first time it was mentioned that a volcano could be blamed for the reason. And the journalist said, whatever the historians think, and they brought in the historians, which I thought was interesting, caused it, whether it was a volcano or whatever, we shouldn't be complaining about how cold this summer is now, because at least they're having a little bit of a summer, and not to worry that they're not going to drop into another summer without a winter. But in 1947 was the first time they correlated the issues with the volcanic eruption. But in 2016 and 2016, for the New York Times and the Washington Post, they both talked about the cause of it, how it was historians who pieces the puzzle together, and how it was discovered that it was the volcano, and it was just, about, the 200th anniversary of the incident that happened. So I thought that was kind of neat because you see it go from 100 years to what they're talking about to 200 years later. This is really interesting for kids to see how one event, which is mostly local to New England area, but at the same time large magazines and large newspapers are getting a hold of the story and they're still talking about it. Also, it's interesting to show the kids how it wasn't until almost 130 years or so later that they kind of figured out what caused the issue. Nowadays, everything is instant. You have a volcanic eruption happening somewhere, within seconds it's either on your phone, on your TV, it's on the radio. I mean, everywhere you look, it's the information age, and so you get the information immediately. But during the 1800s, you had to wait for it to go from a ship to maybe a railroad station to maybe a horse and buggy to who knows what, but it could take almost up to 6 months to a year for information to travel around the world. And even then, nobody knew how to correlate the information of the volcano to the weather that was happening in New England. And so I think it's kind of neat to bring the kids in on this and how they can see how information changed from, almost 200 years ago to now, and how fast and compare how fast and how slow that is. Also, it's kind of neat to show that people still hold on to an event, but with each 100 years they see more information unfolding about that event, and I think that's kind of neat to show the kids too. So you can see that these people aren't talking about what caused it, but they're talking about we don't have to worry about it because how human it is. And then from 100 years later, it says, look, this is what caused it, this is what happens to the atmosphere, and this is how it affected this area. Also, just on a side note, this is kind of neat, but it was in the same year of 1816 as Mary Shelley was stuck inside because this was the year without a summer, and it was too cold. Her and her friends got together to come up with, the scariest story because it was so dreary outside, and now we have Frankenstein. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much.